we find in the beginning of that chapter that Jesus is taking criticism because of who he keeps company with. He's attending dinner parties with all the wrong people. Luke chapter 15 says, then drew near unto him, chapter 15 verse 1, then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners for to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, this man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. And in response to that criticism, Jesus tells 3 parables, each with a common theme. Something is lost, and then it's found. His first 2 stories that he tells here involve interesting main characters, a shepherd and a woman. 2 people in that culture, in that time, that were distrusted and looked down upon. People who in that culture, if called before a court of law, their testimony didn't mean as much because they were so neglected and looked down upon by the rest of society. But nevertheless, he tells a story about a shepherd who has 100 sheep, but one of them becomes lost. And that shepherd, Jesus says, leaves the 99 and goes in search of the one that was lost. And when he hath found it, verse 5 said, he layeth it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he cometh home, he calleth together his friends and neighbors, saying unto them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. Jesus said, I say unto you that likewise joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repents, more than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. And the subtext there being that there are no just people who don't need repentance. There are people who think they don't need repentance.
Right.
But in the next story, he tells about a woman who loses a coin in her house. Now that's not unimaginable when you consider that the floors in those houses were just rocks or dirt fit together. I mean, archaeologists are still finding coins between the rocks in the bottom of the floor thousands of years later. So that's a pretty common occurrence. And Jesus says that this woman, when she's lost this valuable little coin, she lights a lamp because there wouldn't have been a whole lot of light in these houses. The windows were small. There was no really artificial light. So she lights a little oil lamp and she sweeps the floor, hoping that she'll move that coin. She'll find it that way. And then in verse 9, when she finds it, she calls her friends and her neighbors together, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I had lost. And Jesus says, likewise I say unto you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repents.
Yeah.
And the third story that Jesus tells is much longer, much more in depth. It's probably, I've racked my brain, I can't think of another parable that Jesus tells anywhere in the Gospels that packs as much plot and narrative and meaning into a story. I think this is probably the most detailed and complicated parable that he gives us. But this one is about a father that has 2 sons. We call it the parable of the prodigal son. And you could spend a month just on this parable alone, unpacking all the meaning that Jesus crams into it. But there's one part that I want to highlight, just one part I want to highlight this morning. But I still want to go through the parable for those of us that maybe aren't as familiar with this story, so you can understand me when we get to where we're going. The parable goes like this. There was a father that had 2 sons. And one day the younger son comes to the father and says, Father, give me what's mine. Give me my portion of the inheritance. And inheritance worked exactly the same way back then as it does now. You don't get your inheritance until somebody dies.
Right.
So that was kind of an odd request that this young man is making of him. But nevertheless, the father divides out this son's portion and gives it to him. And Jesus' audience would have understood that the younger of 2 sons, the older son, got most of the father's estate. The younger of 2 sons would have received about a third of what his father owned. So he gives the son a third of what he has. And what does the son do with it? He cashes out. Sells whatever real estate they got. He takes these assets and goes to a far country where he blows it on what the Bible calls riotous living. Blows it all. And then famine comes. And all the good time friends that he no doubt had when he was flush with cash are all of a sudden gone. Jesus says nobody would give to him. So what does he do? He uses there was no social safety net in those days. He does about the only thing that he could do. He sells himself into indentured servitude, into slavery, joins himself to a citizen of the country, is the way Jesus puts it here in the King James Version. He becomes a servant of somebody else and finds himself slopping hogs, which is a bad enough job as it is, but keep in mind, Jesus is a Jewish person speaking to a Jewish audience, and pigs were very unclean according to Jewish law. So I'm not sure there was a worse job you could get than slopping hogs. And this is how destitute, how poor, how down on his luck this boy was. Jesus tells him that he was so hungry he was about to eat what the pigs were eating. He was about to get, elbow them pigs out of the trough and get down in there and dig in with him. But then he comes to himself. Jesus says he came to himself. Now, the people here in this story, the people Jesus is speaking to, they were smart people. They understood how stories worked, just the way we understand how stories work. Now, if I told you two stories about somebody that lost something and then found it and were happy about it, and then I start this other story where this son goes off to a foreign country and sins against his father, blows all of his inheritance, and he falls just as deep down as he could possibly get. And then Jesus gets to the turn of the story, goes, and then he came to himself. They know where this story's going. They know exactly where Jesus is about to take it. And you know, because these are righteous, religious people that he's addressing with these stories, you know that they're going, surely he is not about to say what I think. Surely he's not going to go there. And wouldn't you know it? Jesus does go there. Because keep in mind, this is a culture, this is a time where being disrespectful to your parents was a capital offense. Like if you were disrespectful and rude enough to your parents, there was a cause under the law. They would just take you outside of town and throw rocks at you until you died. Yep. I mean, that is how serious respect was. And now here Jesus is telling a story about a boy who was about as disrespectful and dishonest and disreputable as could be. And then we reach the turn of the story where he's getting what they probably thought he deserved. Well, yeah, he acted that way. Of course he deserved to be down there slopping the hogs. And Jesus says, but he came to himself. And Jesus' righteous and religious audience probably thinks, oh, here he goes again. Verse 21 of Matthew chapter 15. The son said unto him, he goes back to his father's house. He comes to himself and he determines, you know what? The lowest servant in my father's house has it better than I do right now. Yeah. So he decides that he's going to go back and he's going to apologize to his dad. And he's not asking to be restored as a son. No. But he says, he decides he's going to ask his dad for a job. So verse 21, the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father, and you get the sense that the father is almost interrupting this speech. The father said to his servants, bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to make merry. You know, so the people that he's speaking to are like, yep, it went exactly where I expected it would go. And now they're probably pretty upset about this story that Jesus is telling. Mm-hmm. But Jesus, being the great speaker that he is, knowing their hearts, right, knowing the hearts of the people that he's speaking to, he does something that I hadn't really thought of until I was studying this lesson. He does something really amazing here. He puts those people in the story. Uh-huh. He puts his audience in the story that he's telling. Here's how it happens. Remember, this father had two sons. Yeah. We haven't seen the first son since the first sentence of the story. Mm-hmm. He's been off screen this whole time. Well, now it's now that Jesus has thoroughly upset all the people that were listening to him, he brings the elder son back into the picture. He's coming in from the field where he's been out working for his father, and he sees a big party happening. Uh-huh. There's singing, there's dancing. He probably smells fatted calf on the grill. And he grabs one of the servants and says, "What in the world is going on here?" Mm-hmm. And the servant says, "Your brother is back. And your father has told us to kill the fatted calf, and we're having a party. Come on." And the older brother refuses to go in. Now, this is dishonoring in its own way. Because there was no such thing as privacy in these days. I heard a minister say once, in the time of Jesus, you couldn't scratch without the whole town knowing about it. People lived packed in. So if you've got a big party going on, and Big Brother's sitting outside with, you can picture him with his arms folded, just like red-faced, probably the vein popping out right there on his forehead. What's he so upset about? And he's causing his family to become the subject of public gossip here. And it becomes even worse because he's apparently out there so long, or he's out there ranting and raving or something, that the father has to leave the party and come out and get him.
Oh my.
And then when the older son is face to face with the father, not only is he causing a big scene out there, listen to how he talks to his father. He answering said to his father, "Lo, these many years do I serve thee." Lo meaning listen here. Listen here. These many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, and yet thou never gavest me a kid, a goat, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots,
embarrassed you,
thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. Notice what words he uses there. This thy son. Doesn't call him my brother. This son of yours comes back, and all of a sudden everything's hunky-dory again. He's wasted everything that you worked for, everything that we took care of, brought shame upon this family, and all of a sudden he comes back, and you're throwing him a big party. You know what? The worst part about it is the older son's kind of got a point. The younger son had wasted a lot of his father's estate. Like I said, most wealth in those days was tied up in not banks, but physical things, real estate and businesses and cattle and stuff like that. That was your wealth back then. You might have had some cash money, but mostly it was tied up in stuff. Right. So when this younger brother cashes out and goes to that foreign country, probably had to sell off a third of the family's land, that boy's sin probably stared his older brother in the face every single day. He had to see strangers come in and take their family's inheritance and take what they had worked for. He had to, maybe things were tighter around the house after Bubby took a third of it and went somewhere else. Maybe they didn't have enough to buy groceries anymore like they used to. Maybe they had to wait longer between new pairs of shoes. His brother's sin stared him in the face, and now all this boy has to come home and do is say, "Sorry, Daddy," and the fatted calf is killed. I have a younger sibling. I understand why that would be upsetting. Now, luckily, Jenna's never pulled anything like that, but I can imagine. The older son might as well have said, "I always knew he was your favorite." But I want you to look at the father's response.
Listen.
He said unto him, "Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine." Son, we've been with each other every day.
Yeah. There's
nothing I don't got. The whole rest of his inheritance, the whole rest of his estate belonged to that older son. Everything I've got is yours. It was meet that we should make merry. Meaning, it was only right that we should make merry. There was no other option we had but to have a party and be glad. For this thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. That older brother had been right by his father's side all those years that his brother was out living it up. Had worked right beside him, had spent so much time with him, and yet had missed something fundamental about the way his father's love worked. He did not understand in all those days they were working together, did not understand what he had. His reaction to the father's love toward his younger brother tells me that when that older brother was out there working, slaving for his daddy, trying to make him happy, he wasn't doing it out of love for his father. He was scared what would happen if he didn't. He understood his father's love as conditional. He understood that if he didn't walk the chalk, if he didn't do what he was supposed to do, maybe those blessings that Daddy was giving him would be cut off. He had never been able to rest in the unconditional love of his father. So when he didn't understand that's how his father loved him, so no wonder he was so confused when the younger son comes home and all of a sudden the fattened calf gets killed and all of a sudden the new robe gets broke out, the new ring gets put on his finger, the new shoes get put on his feet. Yeah. His father loved the older brother just as much as he loved the younger. I know that as a parent. Right. But he was so confused why his father would love him like this. It tells me that he didn't understand how much the father loved him. Right. And now, everything's upside down, twisty-turvy. He's the one on the outside. Now the younger son who had been away and had disrespected his father so much and had brought such shame, now he's on the inside of the party, basking in the father's love, and who's standing on the outside? Who's missing out? Yeah. He's upset that his father was giving this love fully and freely to that undeserving little brother, and now this grudge that he has is driving a wedge between him and the very thing he wanted.
Oh, listen.
This pride and self-righteousness is driving a wedge between him and the father. Yeah. The prodigal son had allowed sin and temptation to separate him from his family. But you know what? Just like the writer of Hebrews tells us about Moses, he discovered that there was pleasure in sin, but it was only for a season. And when he got down as low as he could get, he remembered the love that he felt in his father's house and said, "Nobody here cares about me. But I know where I can find somebody who does." And I promise you, I guarantee you, that prodigal son, nobody at his daddy, I guarantee you, never had to take him off to the side and said, "Listen here, boy. If you don't start acting right, you're out again." No, I guarantee you that the experience that he had out in the world and discovered what a loveless and cold and uncaring place it was, guarantee you he never took it for granted when he was back in Father's house. But that older son was the one on the outs. Now, it's not rebellious living that's keeping him separated from the Father. It's a different kind of sin. Still a sin, but it's a different kind of sin. It's self-righteousness. It's pride. And I think that might be an even more deadly form of sin, because when you're in it, you still think you're in the right. When you're self-righteous and prideful and you're trying to decide who deserves God's love and who doesn't, you think you're on God's side. You're standing on the porch and you don't even know it. Jesus took the people that he's talking to there, those self-righteous, prideful Pharisees and Sadducees and the religious leaders that are criticizing him for hanging out with people like that younger brother. He inserts them into this story in the form of the older brother. Now, as we've said before, you can paint the Pharisees as these like cartoon villains, but that thing started with a good intention. They looked at the disobedience of Israel, and they saw that the judgment that God had brought upon Israel because of their disobedience. And in the beginning, the Pharisees were like, guys, we got to get this stuff together. We got to get back to God's commandments. We got to get back to being faithful to it.
That's right.
It was a good intention. But over time, they fell more in love with the law they were following than the one they were following it for.
Yep.
And it became so much that it became a prideful exercise. It wasn't serving God out of love for God. Like I said, that older brother wasn't serving his father out of love. He was scared what he'd do to him if he didn't. They weren't serving God out of love for God. They were serving God out of one, fear. And also they wanted to look good in front of other people. They got it completely twisted around. And you kind of understand why they're upset that Jesus is just swinging the doors open and letting everybody in. They kept the rules. They walked the chalk. They did what they were supposed to do. They figured they had earned God's favor, and now Jesus is saying, kill the fattened calf, everybody can come. Everybody's welcome. You see where they're coming from. But at the center of their problem here is that they, just like the older son, misunderstood how God's love worked.
Right.
All the way back in Exodus chapter 3, God was talking to Moses, and God said, I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. He said, I will show mercy to whom I will show mercy. You don't get to tell me who I get to love and who I don't.
Right.
That was in the beginning of their book, just about. And yet they had placed themselves, as Jesus said elsewhere, in Moses' seat. And still didn't understand how God's love worked. They were so scandalized by this outpouring of mercy and grace to all the wrong people that they were driving a wedge between themselves and God. They were sitting on the porch when they should have been inside singing and dancing with everybody else. God was throwing a party. They were invited. They got the first invitation. And they were sitting it out because they didn't like who was on the guest list. It's why in Matthew chapter 21, verse 31, Jesus looked at this same group of people and he told them, the publicans, the tax collectors, and the harlots, the prostitutes, are going into the kingdom of God ahead of you. Not because God didn't care about their sin, but they had seen what sin got them. Nothing.
Right.
And they were coming to God to forgive them of those sins and redeem them. Meanwhile, the Pharisees and the other religious folks were still clinging on to what they could do. And man, I don't want to pretend. Again, I don't want to paint the Pharisees as some kind of cartoon villain here, because I see that tendency in myself sometimes, trying to decide who's in and who's out, who deserves mercy and who doesn't. But pretty soon when you start doing that, you realize there's a party going on and you're not there. The moment we start drawing lines, the moment we start saying these people are in and these people are out, Every time I've tried to do that, I noticed Jesus was staying with the people I didn't like. That's my last point I want to bring to your attention. In another brilliant touch of storytelling here, Jesus does not give us a conclusion to this story. You ever notice that? I didn't catch it until I was studying for this lesson. Jesus, there is no the end at the end of this parable. Jesus doesn't tell us how it ends. He leaves the Father and the Son standing out there on the porch. Yeah. The Son, mad at the mercy that his Father has shown the younger rebellious son. The Father still showing mercy to this older son, but saying, man, you gotta get it together, boy. Like, I don't know what you missed in all this time, but like, this is the same love that I've been showing to you forever and ever. And it was me. It was only fair that we would do this for your brother that was dead and is now alive, was lost and is now found. Yeah. Jesus leaves them standing right there. So that the hearers of the story, us today, get to fill in that last little part. What happens? Does the brother remain so scandalized by his father's love for that unfaithful, sinful little brother that he misses out on the father's love himself, that he misses out on the celebration, the dinner party that God's throwing to bring everybody to the same place and put us all back where we needed to be all along? Does he stay out there on the porch? Or does he join the party? That's right, Ronnie. The song that I love so much says, "Come and dine, the master calls, come and dine." Bob posted something on Facebook this week, said you could go and read it. No matter who you are, come to church. If you ain't got it all figured out, come to church anyway. Jesus told him, he said, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and heavy laden." The doors have been swung open wide. The invitation has been sent out, as Ronnie was telling us here a couple of weeks ago. A lot of people are turning down the invitation. They're making excuses. They're saying, "Lord, I can't come because I got this going on, this going on, this going on." There's also people turning down the invitation because they don't like the other people that God invited. Yeah. But when we do that, the only people that miss out is us. Amen. So that's my question for you this morning. Are you going to stay in the porch? Or are you going to come to the party? Amen. Wonderful. I'm going to go to the party. Amen. Thank you for your attention this morning.